Hello and welcome to another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson, the legal and government correspondent, and it is election year and political season. And with us is a statewide candidate for Attorney General office, Toney, from Fond du Lac, right?
Yes, good to see you.
Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
Well, let's start with tell the folks a little bit about yourself and your background, and then we'll get into why you're running and what your priorities are.
Yeah, well, I was born and raised in Fond du Lac, and I've lived there almost my entire life other than going to college at St. Norbert, law school in the Twin Cities, and then back to Wisconsin after that. I spent about 2.5 years in private practice where I saw the other side of the criminal justice system doing criminal defense work, mental health, juvenile law, just a small bit of bankruptcy. And then at 28 years old in 2012, I was elected as the Republican District Attorney of Fond du Lac County and had bipartisan support in that election. And now I'm in my 10th year as the elected DA of Fond du Lac County. I also serve as the president of a bipartisan group, the Wisconsin District Attorneys Association, which represents district attorneys, assistant DAs, and prosecutors across Wisconsin. And in my time as a DA, I've prosecuted anything you can think of, from cold case homicides, racketeering, complex drug conspiracies, sexual assault, domestic violence, drug death, violent gun crime, you name it, I've prosecuted it. Even as an intern, I did my first jury trial for a speeding ticket. And so there's been nothing too big or too little for me to handle, which has forced me to use nearly every resource our Department of Justice has to offer for public safety, working with the great employees that we have fighting for public safety here in Wisconsin and fighting for justice on behalf of victims, and proud to have that fair, firm, but tough on crime record as a district attorney in Fond du Lac County to have earned the right to be law enforcement's choice in this race for Attorney General, where I have 83%, about 60 of our 72 sheriffs have endorsed me, and it's Republican sheriffs, Democrat sheriffs, even an independent sheriff that we have over 100 sheriffs, DAs, and police chiefs across Wisconsin that want a prosecutor and not a politician to lead our Department of Justice, not to mention the Wisconsin Troopers Association, the Wisconsin Fraternal Order of Police, and police associations from all across Wisconsin, and very humbled and honored to have that support, especially being the son of a police officer. My dad spent over 30 years as with our sheriff's office in Fond du Lac County, and he retired as a patrol sergeant. And I've never walked a day in those shoes, but I've seen the sacrifices that our law enforcement make on a daily basis. And I know what it's like watching my dad work third shift, and the challenges, not just for police officers, but anybody out there that might work third shift, and the effect that has on their sleep schedule, their families, where he's missed sporting events, school events, and holidays for his job, and the sacrifices he made to help keep our community safe. And that's really colored a lot of how I view public safety and the disappointment I've seen from our current Attorney General.
All right. So you said that this was your 10th year as a prosecutor, and at 28, were you a prosecutor before you ran for that office?
No, I had interned in the district attorney's office in Fond du Lac County for 2 summers while in law school, and then took a job with our former district attorney at the time, who was actually a Democrat. And he hired me knowing my Republican politics, and was really proud to have bipartisan support then, just like I do now, because we don't play politics with public safety.
See, but this is your 4th term running for prosecutorial
Sure. Yep. I've got 3 DA terms and now running for Attorney General to be our top cop. So 4th election.
Okay. And so, thank you for that introduction. So, you're in Fond du Lac, so we don't hear a lot about. We hear more with Minnesota news than we do Wisconsin. But what brings you over into this area this particular Saturday?
Well, I've visited all 72 counties here in Wisconsin. I just spent about 721 miles in the car, over 11 and a half hours on Thursday, visiting my final 4 counties, going to Iron, Ashland, Bayfield, and Douglas County, saving the furthest away for last, where to me it's really important. If you want to be our Attorney General, you need to visit all counties in Wisconsin to give our entire state the opportunity to meet, talk with me, and ask questions. And so it's been important for me not to just visit places once, but as many times as I possibly can. So it's not new for me to be on this side of the state, to continue making connections with voters across Wisconsin, and to see the issues where we have violent crime affecting parts of our state at historic levels like we've never seen, a drug epidemic with fentanyl and methamphetamine crushing families, killing kids, and I've sat across from too many parents that have had to bury their child from a drug death, or families that have lost a loved one in a homicide, and I've sadly lost track of the total number of homicide cases that I've prosecuted, and it's important that we make sure we fight for justice on behalf of victims. We can never bring their loved one back, but we can give some small measure of justice, because we're never able to put a number for a sentence to value the loss of their loved one, but we can find that small measure of justice. And so as I've watched some of the stories coming out where our governor, through his parole commissioner, has allowed nearly 300 murderers and attempted murderers to be released from prison, and over 40 child rapists, and these are discretionary releases. And there are many factors the parole commission looks at, but two of them are, is it in the interest of justice, and does it appreciate the seriousness of the
Attorney
offense?
General sit on that parole
The
board?
Attorney General does not, but the Attorney General is our top cop. And the Attorney General should be speaking out against these releases, standing up for victims and those families. And our Attorney General has been silent for probably nearly a month as these stories have come out, refusing to stand up for victims and say, this is wrong, this is not in the interest of justice, it depreciates the seriousness of the offense, and it has stolen justice from these families. I was in Milwaukee a week ago Saturday, meeting with parents that have had to bury their child. A couple weeks, 2 months ago, the homicide clearance rate in Milwaukee was about 56%, and I've heard it's gone down since then. And I met with some of those moms that are in that 44%, that don't know who murdered their child, that are waiting for justice. Some families never get justice. Some families do, and we have an administration that has stolen that justice, and an Attorney General who has refused to stand up for victims, and we need a top cop that is going to stand with victims and the rule of law here in Wisconsin.
So as Attorney General, would you step in then in front of the Milwaukee County prosecutors to prosecute their crime in their county?
What I said last fall, late October, early November, we need a legislative change to give our Attorney General's office original prosecution authority in Milwaukee County, so we can take on cases they're unable or unwilling to prosecute, to augment what we're seeing there, adding additional resources to our Department of Justice, more of those frontline prosecutors and more of those Division of Criminal Investigation special agents that investigate some of the most complex cases, because we need to have all hands on deck to end the historic violence and drug epidemic. And the sad reality is our Attorney General, according to his own Director of the Division of Criminal Investigation, Tina Virgil, at a March Badger Sheriff's Conference, she said only 88 out of 113 of those Division of Criminal Investigation, or DCI, positions had been filled, a near 25% reduction. And we also saw story from the Wisconsin State Journal in March of this year. Those frontline criminal litigation unit prosecutors at our Department of Justice, 30% reduction where they hadn't even been trying to fill those positions. And when we see historic violence, we need all hands on deck. And our Attorney General's response with those DCI special agents, well, we hire them in batches, and that's how it's always done. During historic violence and drugs, we don't do things how it's always been done. We have to be proactive lead, and as Attorney General, I will make sure those positions are filled, and we never see the vacancies that our Attorney General has allowed to happen. We need an Attorney General that's going to make public safety the #1 priority, and that's why I got into this race last year.
And so of these unfilled positions, they're like, how long have they been unfilled?
So we've seen some of these prosecutor positions for over a year. DCI positions, I think as of later this week, we will see there's basically 6 of the director level and up leadership positions that there will be a complete turnover in all 6 of those positions, from the director, the deputy administrator, and the administrator of that DCI agency. So we've seen an exodus of decades of experienced law enforcement leaders in our state because of the mismanagement of our Attorney General. And his #1 campaign promise back in 2018 was to fix our crime labs. That was his campaign promise. And in comparison to our prior Attorney General, Brad Schimmel, Josh Kaul has failed. He's actually taking longer to test most categories of items, including that crucial DNA evidence, despite taking in and testing thousands of less items. It's a record of failure, and he says he's proud of his record on public safety, but he's failed at his #1 campaign promise and effectively defunded police and prosecutors, making it more difficult for DAs like me and our law enforcement across Wisconsin.
All right. So how long will it take, do you figure, to fill those positions?
Well, we don't have a problem attracting prosecutors and agents to become special agents at our Department of Justice. That's the crown jewel here in Wisconsin. But the problem is our Attorney General wasn't even recruiting for these positions until sometime in the last probably few months of this year. And we need an Attorney General that's going to prioritize and always make sure we're recruiting those fantastic law enforcement officers to work at the Division of Criminal Investigation as well as be Assistant Attorney General prosecutors, because we rely on them across Wisconsin. One of the consequences that we've seen as a result of this, we've now seen around August or September of this year, there were 1,000 or more of a backlog of these child sex predator referrals. We call them internet crimes against children, or ICAC, in the law enforcement world. And these are circumstances where somebody could be sexually assaulting a child, could be child enticement, manufacturing, creating, distributing, downloading child pornography, where they haven't even gotten to investigate. There's a difference between putting your eyes on something and actually investigating, which is leaving dangerous child predators roaming our streets because our Attorney General hasn't prioritized these public safety positions, and it's unconscionable. And there is no excuse for that given the role of our top cop, and we need an Attorney General that's going to make that the #1 priority. And that's why I'm proud to have the trust of law enforcement across Wisconsin to be our next top cop.
And you say making public safety #1 priority, and as the #1 law enforcement official, which of those criminal laws would you give priority to? Because you can't prosecute all with the same vigor, so which ones would get priority in your administration?
Well, what I've said is, as we've talked about already, original jurisdiction for Milwaukee to end the historic violence and drugs, and adding more prosecutors and special agents to be able to investigate and prosecute those cases. Because if we protect Milwaukee, we protect all of Wisconsin, because that crime spreads across our state. And in other parts, it could be the Twin Cities that spreads crime throughout our state, just given the geography of those areas. But Milwaukee is an area that we can help, and that's where I would be directing our resources, while still making sure that we're deploying resources across Wisconsin. I was at a press conference with a number of our Western Wisconsin sheriffs just a couple weeks ago in Eau Claire, and we learned the DCI field office in Eau Claire was at 50% staffing with those agents. And we need to make sure that they're fully staffed and never allowed to be at that level, because that office covers a huge chunk of Western Wisconsin that our law enforcement rely on for complex drug investigations, could be homicides, cold cases, could be an officer-involved shooting, where those DCI agents are the ones that lead those investigations. And when we talk about officer-involved shootings, everybody remembers when Toney Evers condemned and convicted that police officer in the Jacob Blake shooting back in August of 2020. What most people don't recall is who was investigating that shooting, and it was our Attorney General, Josh Call. And the DCI agents, those Division of Criminal Investigation special agents, were leading that investigation, which means Josh Call had to have known a knife was found in the vehicle at minimum August 23rd when the shooting occurred. The very next day, August 24th, Jacob Blake admitted to having a knife. Jacob Blake again admitted that he had a knife on August 25th. Yet Josh Call said nothing, failing to tell the world what the governor had just said was not true. There are more facts. We will protect the integrity of the investigation and remain calm. He said nothing, putting politics over public safety, knowing what the governor said was not true. And he didn't say anything about that knife until August 26th, after 2 people were dead and Kenosha was on fire. We need leaders that will not play politics with public safety. And in the aftermath of that, a group of our sheriffs had a conference call with our Attorney General, pleading, effectively asking him, please give us some public showing of support, say something supportive of law enforcement. And our Attorney General, Josh Call, said something to the effect of, I'm not going to take sides. Well, I know what it's like as the son of a cop to not know if my dad's alive. On March 20th of 2011, Officer Craig Burkholtz, a City of Fond du Lac police officer, Craig was shot and killed rushing to aid another officer that had been wounded. Craig died. I couldn't get a hold of my dad as I saw those reports coming in when it happened when my dad was on shift, praying for the best. And by the grace of God, my dad is home. He responded to that scene and he made it home. I still get to say, I love you. Craig's family never gets that opportunity again. I know what it's like to sit across from Trooper Trevor Casper, Wisconsin State Trooper, 21 years old, first day on his own after field training, spotted a man that had been involved in a bank robbery and had murdered somebody in Marinette County earlier that day, and was in the city of Fond du Lac waiting for backup when that man opened fire on Trevor. Trevor could have saved his life, but Trevor stopped, got out of his squad car, was fatally wounded and Trevor ended that threat, laying down his life and doing that officer-involved death investigation, I know Trevor Casper saved lives. He gave his life for people he would never meet. And to see our Attorney General turn his back on our law enforcement when they needed him, our top cop, more than ever, that's personal to me, because our law enforcement has earned the right to have an Attorney General that will stand with them, not just when it's politically popular, because we don't play politics with public safety.
All right. And part of law enforcement, obviously, is putting people behind bars, but there's a lot of studies talking about the effectiveness of prevention. Do you see the Attorney General's office having any role in prevention of crime? And
Yeah. So that's something I campaigned on in 2012, running for district attorney, to bring a drug court to Fond du Lac County because we didn't have one. And I worked with other government agencies, community partners, and we successfully brought a drug court to Fond du Lac County. We also had a diversion program that was active when I took over as DA, and we expanded it to include more potential crimes, more drug testing, partnering with our drug court program to make sure that we're giving people an opportunity for certain lower level offenses to potentially maybe avoid a felony conviction and get convicted of misdemeanors, maybe avoid a conviction altogether, depending on the case-by-case circumstances and using discretion. And looking at how the opioid epidemic was crushing us, I saw a gap in what we needed to do and started an opioid coalition with a 4-pillar approach of treatment, harm reduction, education, and the enforcement side with other community partners that we then merged with our drug-free communities, where prosecutors across Wisconsin are stepping out and helping in these different areas where we lock up dangerous criminals. We also have opportunities for people at those lower level offenses potentially not to have those convictions. And Brad Schimmel did many of those same things as our Attorney General, and we haven't seen that from our Attorney General. He was critical of Brad Schimmel about the opioid deaths back in 2018, and on Josh Call's watch, they've only continued to go up. And he needs to take responsibility. If he's going to criticize our former Attorney General, he's taken no accountability, as we've seen historic violence and a drug epidemic, and he has not put all the resources on the table for law enforcement and prosecutors here in Wisconsin.
When it comes to limited resources, do you think that there might be some benefit to, for instance, decriminalizing THC so we don't have resources being spent in those low level crimes, as you put it?
Well, the reality, I've heard, we all have, the phrase follow the science for the past few years during COVID. And if you look at the science on marijuana, it doesn't support that. Even if you look at the medicinal side, which if the studies would show, and that's what we need, the federal government needs to allow for the medicinal side of marijuana to be studied so that a doctor could say, this is how many milligrams, this is the pill, this is how many hours, take it with food, don't drink alcohol, all of those type of things, to know what those results might be. And if that would be a way to reduce our dependency on opioids, that would be a big win for the country. But we need the studies and the science behind it, and it doesn't exist right now. And the idea that we would somehow make it easier for kids to get access to drugs, the marijuana we see today is not the marijuana of the 60s and 70s, as the potency is significantly higher. And I've prosecuted enough violent crime that's drug related, and I can guarantee the cartels are not going to give up on marijuana. They'll either get involved in the business here, or they'll continue to undercut that price sending marijuana into Wisconsin. And on top of that, if you're a business owner, if you have people that are driving cars, operating equipment, heavy machinery, have to pass a drug test, that makes it incredibly difficult. There was an article out earlier this year on the trucking industry and how marijuana has made it more difficult to find truck drivers across Wisconsin. And so the science doesn't support it, and we have to be serious. I don't think anybody thinks we should be making it easier for kids to get access to drugs. And I think it was maybe on a college campus that Toney Evers suggested that marijuana should be legalized on a college campus to kids. I mean, that's irresponsible. We need leaders that are not going to play politics with public safety.
So I take it you're a no then for decriminalizing marijuana or medicinal use?
As I've said, I am against decriminalizing, and we need to see the studies and the science before we can talk about medicinal use. It's just not there right now, and that's where the federal government needs to take action.
Okay. I see we have just a couple minutes left. Do you have anything else that you wanted to touch on that we haven't already?
Well, you know, the job of the Attorney General is to enforce the rule of law, not pick and choose when to do it. I've done probably 40 or 50 jury trials, a complex homicide, cold case, intentional homicide, hate crime homicide. And I ask my potential jurors, do you all agree to follow the law as the judge instructs you? And they all raise their hand committing to that. And I'll ask a follow-up question. And I ask this question across Wisconsin. Is there anybody here that would only enforce the law when you agree? Nobody raises their hand. That's because we don't pick and choose when to enforce the rule of law. It's the rule of law which separates America from so much of the rest of the world. That you could walk into any courtroom in Wisconsin and have the law applied equally to your facts, equal justice under the law for all. And our Attorney General has called me a radical and an extremist because I've committed to enforcing the rule of law, not just when I agree. That's what my record is as a district attorney. I was attacked for that in the Republican primary, where I've been willing to stand up against my own party, not when it's popular, but to follow the law. And our Attorney General asked in an article earlier this year, when has he ever gone against the governor? He couldn't point to a single thing. He had an opportunity during the Jacob Blake shooting. He failed. He had an opportunity with these parole commission releases, and he failed, and has been like a plastic bag blowing in the wind depending on whichever way the wind blows for his politics. And we need an attorney general that's not going to play politics with public safety. We need a prosecutor and not a politician leading our Department of Justice, and that's why I'm beyond proud and humbled to be law enforcement's choice with bipartisan support from sheriffs and district attorneys, so many of them here in western Wisconsin that have lined up behind my campaign because they've seen the public safety failures, sadly, of our Attorney General. And
I think, bipartisan support is always a good thing. When it comes to the local law enforcement, they are facing, epidemics with regard to drugs and so forth. But one area where we see a lot of county officials, maybe Fond du Lac's included, just don't have the resources, and that is to protect consumers and enforce the consumer protection laws. Do you see the Attorney General having a role in that, and would you commit to that?
So absolutely. I was actually just having a conversation with one of my detectives on Friday where we see, financial scams, for example, where you might get one or two of these, say, in the city of Fond du Lac, where that police department's looking at it. That same group might commit another scam, say, La Crosse or in Monroe County, maybe Burnett County, and you could have all these different agencies potentially looking at that. It just doubling, tripling, quadrupling investigations that may never get off the ground because it was only $1,000, $5,000 and the agency might not have the resources. That's something we have to look at putting at our Department of Justice so that agencies, similar to what we see with those cyber tips for those child sex predator cases, so we can have that clearinghouse maximizing our resources, because for some people, elderly or others, $5,000, $10,000 is so much money for them that we need to make sure we're protecting and holding those accountable that are committing that type of fraud and scams in our communities across Wisconsin. And we don't have a great system set up for that, and that's something that our Department of Justice can and must address with the legislature's help. And that's a conversation I'll be having with the legislature to find a way to make sure we're protecting the people of Wisconsin.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Eric Toney, for your time here today. I want to thank our viewers for watching another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. And if people need to know more about you or find out, what could they look at?
So they can go to www.erictoney.com, ERICTONEY.com, or you can find me on Facebook, Eric Toney WI, on Twitter, Eric J. Toney. Reach out, send us a message, and happy to respond, and we'll be honored to have their vote and their support in our November election to have a prosecutor and not a politician as our top cop.
All right. Eric Toney, thank you for coming on the show. And we'll be watching the election coming up in 2 weeks. All right. And I want to thank our viewers again. Keep watching.